Hey guys, so I wanted to try and do some new content for the community, and I'm gonna start off with a battle analysis of Friday's Day 1 Worlds competition between Paul Chua and Kotaro Natagome. And these guys played in the first round of the tournament, and it was very interesting to see how Paul would react to Kotaro's quite interesting team, because as you get into the later rounds, everyone knew what Kotaro was gonna do to you, but in round one, it was pretty much a mystery. So Paul brought Porygon Z, Mawile, Garchomp, Thundurus, Ludicolo, and Heatran, while Kotaro brought Smeargle, Chandelure, Aurorus, Altaria, Lucario, Salamence. And at first glance, you can see Paul Chua got it looks like a manual rain team, and Porygon Z also learns Trick Room. So in a regular match, I think Paul Chua would bring out those kind of techs, but versus Kotaro, he had to play a very different sort of game just because of how Smeargle in Team Preview works. Because most people react to Smeargle because Smeargle, let's go back here. And how Smeargle works is that it usually has Dark Void, and the other moves usually have like a Protect, and usually it's holding Focus Sash so it can survive one turn of Dark Void. Randy last year used a Tailwind variant so that if people decided to double Protect on turn 1 against like a Fake Out, he could set up the Tailwind and then Dark Void on turn 2. So there's a lot of interesting things you can do, and the other interesting things about this team are when you see Lucario, Chandelure, and Aurorus, and even Altaria. Those are very low usage Pokemon for this metagame, as we can see in the rest of the World Championships. I don't think anyone else touched these Pokemon at all, and to see Kotaro bring all of these is very scary as an opponent, because you think, oh, they're just like low usage Pokemon, so you can kind of just throw them aside. But what Kotaro ends up doing in this set is very interesting. And you can see both players kind of pick their Pokemon pretty quickly right here, not using too much of the timer that's allotted. And we end up seeing, let's see. Yep, we end up seeing the leads for Kotaro and Paul. And I know for a fact Kotaro leads Lucario and Smeargle. And then Paul is going to lead his Thundurus, if I remember, and his Garchomp. And Garchomp's pretty interesting because it's not the preferred ground type for this metagame, which is Landorus, of course. But Garchomp can do some interesting things. It's pretty quick, pretty popular last year. So Paul obviously leads his Thundurus against a Smeargle. You can assume it has Taunt or Thunder Wave or something like that, so it doesn't get to use the Dark Void turn 1 and pick up a huge advantage. And Garchomp's important here too, because maybe Paul expected it, but Lucario has Follow Me, so Garchomp has spread moves, so they don't get affected by Follow Me. So he can pretty much safely Earthquake and Taunt or Thunder Wave this turn and see what the Smeargle is going to do, because usually you expect a Smeargle with Focus Sash, but Kotaro reveals that his has the Power Herb for his Geomancy ability. So we see Paul, looks like Paul's pretty much locked in right here pretty quickly. No hesitation on what he wants to make here. And Kotaro has this strategy in mind to get off the Dark Void, get the Follow Me, and start setting up Geomancy so he can swap it to his other Pokemon in the back. So Paul does go for the Taunt and the Earthquake, and he will hit Lucario, which is holding the Focus Sash, and Lucario is going to get its move off, which is a Rock Tomb on the Garchomp. So what he wants the Rock Tomb here to do is to slow down Garchomp. So next turn, he can hit it with a move before it can knock out Lucario or Smeargle. And Smeargle gets the boost. The Moody boost gives it attack and defense, which is pretty negligible. Right here, you can see Kotaro setting up so that he can follow me the taunt that's headed towards Smeargle and hit the Dark Void on both Pokemon. And this is very important for Kotaro because he needs to get that his whole team is about this Geomancy Heart Swap, so he's going to be able to get Lucario here taunted, and it's going to get knocked out. But that's exactly what Kotaro wants in this situation, because he wants the next turn to be Geomancy and bringing in one of his Pokemon. So Lucario doesn't actually faint in this turn, which is prevented by the Dark Void, obviously. But it does miss the Thunderous, so this almost brings up a repeat turn, because Kotaro can Dark Void again, and Paul can pretty much, he has to try to taunt again, or knock out the Lucario using the Thunderbolt, but it's probably going to get put to sleep this turn no matter what, unless it happens to miss again. And at this point, Paul knows that the Smeargle doesn't have Focus Sash anymore, but he still doesn't know what the item is. And it seems like a pretty straightforward Dark Void team with Smeargle, just to get Dark Void up and then throw in some strong Pokemon like Salamence and stuff. But Kotaro does opt to switch the Smeargle out here for his Aurorus, and Aurorus threatens like a lot of damage with the Hyper Voice, with the Refrigerate ability, which gives it the Ice type for Hyper Voice. And so Kotaro chooses to go for another speed drop on the Thundurus and Garchomp. So even though that the Thundurus is alive and Garchomp is sleeping, Aurorus is going to be able to get a lot of damage off if it does happen to hit through paralysis. But I believe what happens here is an untimely full para right here. And Paul Chua, he played this game as well as he could, but I think if a couple more rolls went Kotaro's way, it could have been it definitely could have been a sort of alternate sort of series with a different result, because Kotaro really played this set pretty interestingly, and he does pick up the full para here while Garchomp got the second turn of sleep. So Heatran is a pretty good switch in there, because obviously it resists the ice, and Paul did not want to sacrifice both of his Pokemon right there, and he knew if Aurorus had hit through the Hyper Voice that obviously he couldn't do anything about Garchomp going down, but he had to save Thundurus, and Heatran gonna protect here, and then you can expect Lucario close combat into that slot, which is expected, and then he gets the Earthquake off too, which will not KO the Aurorus here, but obviously takes out that Lucario. And it's important here because Lucario kind of did its job. It slowed down Garchomp and let the Dark Void go off. Sadly for Kotaro, the Dark Void's impact is already over, but he will have two -1 Pokemon against him, so he can definitely get the Dark Void off once again. And Heatran used his Protect last turn, so it has no chance of preventing the Dark Void from attempting to hit it, at least. And Aurorus, despite being paralyzed, if the Dark Void goes off, it can definitely KO that Garchomp with Hyper Voice, or one of its, or if it has Earth Power, it could definitely take out the Heatran as well, because Aurorus does learn Earth Power. So Paul doesn't really have too many options here. He wants to protect his Garchomp, so he knows the Dark Void's coming. But Kotaro switches it up and goes for the Geomancy Power Herb. Now this is pretty safe because he had to expect Garchomp to protect, and Paul had to had nothing really to do with his heat trend right there. It does go for the heat wave, and Auroras avoids it, which is very important in allowing the hyper voice to go off. And if that heat wave had hit, it would have allowed. See, the result there is pretty much the same. The hyper voice hit heat trend for a little bit of damage, but it didn't hit the Garchomp. Smeargle's at actually +4 speed right now, and +2 special attack, and then +1 special defense. Now he sends out the Salamence, and this is where things sort of like come to fruition for Kotaro, because he's gonna have the Salamence here. And Paul may not understand what's happening right here, but because what you see usually you see Smeargle learn Baton Pass and try to pass the Geomancy to some Pokemon in the back, but now it's Kotaro only has 2 Pokemon left, so that isn't really an option in this situation, obviously. But what most people overlooked was that Smeargle can get this move called Hard Swap, which is a Manify only move, and it is pretty much Baton Pass, or it swaps the stat boost that you get with Pokemon on the field. So Smeargle's going to go for the Dark Void first and lose the double Avoid. Well, Heatran protected too. So we're going to see Garchomp. It's pretty slow and it's firing off a Rock Slide, so it's not doing too much. It can't Earthquake, or well, it could have Dragon Clawed that turn, to be honest, but I'm not sure Paul expected that his Garchomp would survive that turn anyway, and just maybe wanted to get off some damage. Now, this is pretty much the pivotal turn of the match, because Kotaro is going to be able to pick up a couple KOs here with his trick, and you can see Paul's reaction is not too happy, because the Hyper Voice is just gonna, holy crap. I think the Smeargle there had the accuracy drop that it also passed to the Salamence, so that's why that move missed. And it ends up not mattering too much, but Smeargle didn't get to survive that turn because of it. As we could see, when the Hyper Voice hits the Heatran the next time, it does actually KO it from that range at +2. So Smeargle would have been able to survive that turn, and Kotaro could have been really pressuring Paul with a 2v2 Thundurus and his 4th, which he actually didn't reveal in this game. And he gets a double Avoid again. And I'm pretty sure that Salamence eventually does get to move in this game and knock out these Pokemon, or at least Heatran, I believe. And we'll see, it actually does KO both, or it KOs Thundurus with a critical hit, and Heatran gets another Heat Wave off. Salamence, despite being paralyzed, is really fast due to this +4 boost it got. But Paul has the Mawile out, and it's going to drop the Intimidate, which doesn't matter. But it will be able to just Sucker Punch the Salamence, or use Play Rough. It's pretty much Paul's choice. But in order for Kotaro to win this game, he's going to have to hit that Hyper Voice. So Paul pretty much plays it safe here and gets the Sucker Punch off and KOs the Salamence in game 1. So that's game 1. Now, what's important to look at here is Paul, after game 1, he understands Kotaro's strategy and maybe has figured out a way to stop it. But if he got a couple of voids, very untimely, but Paul played that game pretty well, made some good switches, and basically controlled the pace of the game despite Kotaro playing a strategy that it reacts to what Pokemon are on the field and tries to pretty much go really fast and want to KO everything after long turns of setup. So Paul was avoiding that setup the best he could, and despite a Moody boost going against and for Kotaro, basically, he got the speed boost, but he did get the accuracy drop as well, which really impacted the game later with a couple misses. And that game could have gone a lot differently if he had hit those hyper voices instead of missing them. It would have been Mawile versus Salamence 1v1, and the Salamence, the Mawile, the Salamence would not have been in Sucker Punch range after that. After taking the 2 heat waves that were able to be hit off when the Salamence missed the hyper voice on the Heatrans. So we're gonna try and get into game 2 right here. Let's see. Now this battle just started. Same leads. Both players very confident that if they play the same game a little bit better, or in Paul's case exactly the same, they will come out ahead in this game. So we're going to see the same exact leads. And Kotaro probably doesn't have to adjust too much in this game. He knows how Paul's going to play him, and he's going to get the Earthquake and follow me off. So he's going to follow me the Earthquake. Like I said, ignoring the follow me is Garchomp, and he is also going to get the Thunderbolt off. So he's going to try and go for the Dark Void this turn. And this time he in fact hits both of them. So the way sleep works is next turn both of them will definitely be sleeping for an entire other turn. So this gives Kotaro an entire free turn after this Moody boost, which seems inconsequential, but it did get the special attack boost, which will give the Geomancy boost +4 after next turn, considering all things considered going well. So Aurorus gets sent in again. Obviously it knows the ice type, Hyper Voice, and he's going to threaten 2 knockouts right here. He's just going to Hyper Voice Geomancy most likely on this turn. So Smeargle has to set up the Geomancy, and next turn he's going to be able to pass it over to the Aurorus right before he gets to attack and threaten even more damage, because Paul reveals his Focus Sash on Garchomp, I believe, so the Hyper Voice doesn't one-hit KO through the... but it does get the Psych Up off too. So not only does Kotaro have the Heart Swap, but he does have the Psych Up. So in the same turn, Aurorus gets to copy the Smeargle's boost. Now he has Heart Swap Smeargle at all his boosts and Aurorus at all the boosts. So Paul has to switch here or get double knocked out. But what Paul didn't reveal yet is, of course, the Focus Sash that I was talking about. So if Paul wakes up here, he won't be in too bad of a situation, because he can get the Earthquake off on Smeargle and Aurorus. And as we saw the first game, the Earthquake did not KO the Aurorus. But it's obviously huge to get this damage off right here. What happened the first game, however, is Aurorus was at 100%, and right there it used its Life Orb right before it hit with the Earthquake, which is pretty bad for Kotaro because he wasn't able to survive the Earthquake. Paul of course gets his Mawile out, and Kotaro gets the Salamence out. So this isn't too good of a situation for Kotaro, because both of these Pokemon threaten Salamence very, very easily. But he does have the speed advantage in Smeargle, so he will be able to use Dark Void if he chooses to. And he can also Heart Swap onto Salamence. However, that is pretty risky play, because a double target will most definitely without misses KO the Salamence, even with the Intimidate drop. So Paul has to really be careful here, and he does go for the aggressive Heart Swap instead of the Dark Void. So Paul chooses to knock out the Smeargle with the Dragon Claw, just in case, just to try and get the Dark Void off of the playing field. And the Hyper Voice gets a double knockout after the big boost. And Mawile doesn't have especially high special defenses, but it is a resisted Hyper Voice at +2. So it's going to get knocked out right there. And Heatran comes in along with that's the last Pokemon. Jesus. So Salamon's going to get the Hyper Voice here. Single target, +2. And it's going to pick up the knockout. So Kotaro plays very, very excellently in Game 2. And manages to pick up the Game 2 against Paul Chua. And as we said in the first game, Kotaro was pretty unlucky in that game. I mean, Paul wasn't unlucky, but he just didn't get the sort of expected results of his moves. You don't expect your Hyper Voices to miss after getting a evasiveness drop or accuracy drop, and you don't expect full paras and stuff like that. So Kotaro gets to play the game with his expected results, and we can see how great he played in that game and how he was able to set his strategy up. And Paul just he did his best to stop the strategy, but it just wasn't enough without getting some paralyzes or things like that. He got hit by the Dark Void, which was almost unavoidable, and it snowballed from there. The Dark Void hitting both Thundurus and Garchomp really put Paul into a tight corner because he couldn't switch in his back Pokemon very safely. And in Game 3, of course, we see the same leads for the third time. Players very confident. I don't think Kotaro really has any other leads he can lead against these two, because we see the Lucario be very key to the strategy. It has Follow Me, so it can take away all the taunts, and it can support against like a hypothetical Kangaskhan. However, Paul wasn't using Kangaskhan, but it is a very good support Pokemon on Kotaro's team due to its speed control and how it can follow me moves away. So we see Kotaro go actually very defensively with a double protect on turn 1 to scout out what Paul's moves are going to be. And he ends up going with a Rock Slide, and I believe that was a Thunder Wave targeted at the Smeargle. So we're going to see turn 2 with Kotaro unable to protect his Pokemon, and both players move pretty quickly right here. So he goes for the Follow Me, just like Game 2 started out. And so he's going to be able to redirect the Thunder Wave and most likely an Earthquake coming out here, unless Paul decides... No, he decides for the Rock Slide to attempt to flinch the Smeargle so it doesn't get the Dark Void off, and he does succeed right there. So we're going to see right there real quick. In the first 2 games, Paul chose to use the Earthquake to try and sash the Lucario and try to chip the Smeargle out. But he decided in this game that if he did that again and didn't get as like lucky, he didn't get his chances in Game 1, he probably was just going to get rolled again, like how Game 2 happened. So he had to change his strategy up. So this turn, he can actually pretty safely Earthquake again, because Lucario's chipped off and Garchomp threatens the KO on both Pokemon. So he's going to use Follow Me still, get the Follow Me off through the Paralyze, and yep, Paul Chua goes for the taunt onto the Lucario because of the Follow Me, and Smeargle gets to use the Dark Void due to its speed boost. So Paul Chua is in another situation where both of his Pokemon are asleep. However, what changes this turn from the previous game was that the Lucario had gone out. He got knocked out on the Dark Void turn, so he had Kotaro was able to gain a lot of momentum by switching in his Aurorus in that situation so that he could just immediately start pressuring. But now Lucario is kind of sitting there, and it can use Rock Tomb against Thundurus, and Smeargle can obviously start setting up, but it doesn't really pressure anything on Paul's side. It just has close combat and Rock Tomb with the Follow Me and the other ones. And Paul's Pokemon can't move this turn, and he either has to switch his Pokemon out or leave him in. So this makes Kotaro one turn behind from the game before, where he gets the Salamence in this time instead of the Aurorus. So what the Aurorus was able to come in last turn because the last game because of how the pressure was working out. Aurorus was able to threaten both Pokemon immediately after psyching up and hyper voicing. But just in case that Paul had to switch in something, the Salamence is a much safer option in this situation. So next turn Smeargle is going to be able to Heart Swap, and Salamence will be able to get his Hyper Voice off, barring the turn 1 Wake Up by Thundurus into Thunder Wave fully para. Yeah, he would have to do all of that. Now Garchomp obviously is Sash, so even at +2 it won't get 1 KO'd, and Thundurus was able to survive the first, well, it wasn't because it was crit, but I believe it would have been able to survive in the first game had it not been critical hit. So we're going to see obviously the Mega Evolution right here with Smeargle, and Smeargle probably goes for the Heart Swap right here, and he does get the Thunder Wave off, Taunt off onto the Smeargle turn 1, which is even worse for Kotaro because he doesn't get the Heart Swap off. And we see that Salamence reveals the Dragon Pulse move, hitting Thundurus with a critical hit. Actually does a lot of damage with the crit. And Salamence notices that Thundurus is definitely a pretty big threat right here. So with Smeargle not knowing any actual attacking moves, it's going to have to sit here or struggle and move out. So that wake up for Paul was very important, and it really keeps him in the game right here, because otherwise he would have been 1 KO'd by the Heart Swap Dragon Pulse, and his Garchomp would still be sleeping. So that situation, very bad for Paul, very good for Kotaro. But now with that one turn taunt onto the Smeargle puts Paul Chua ahead of the game right here. And Kotaro chooses to struggle with his Smeargle. I think he just wants to break that Focus Sash right there just for that turn. And Garchomp will wake up on this turn and knock out the Smeargle with his Earthquake. So Kotaro's plans were foiled again. Oh, okay, so Smeargle had gotten a defense boost, so it was able to survive the Earthquake for another turn. But it's not too impactful because it has to struggle again or switch out. And switching out is probably the best course of action for Kotaro because Smeargle is going to knock itself out with the next struggle move, and it has some use right there to be able to use its Dark Void or Spiky Shield in a last-ditch late-game situation to try and turn the tides against the Mawile and Heatran that Paul has been bringing to the match. So he sends in Lucario back in, which isn't really a threatening Pokemon for Paul to face. However, he does switch in the Porygon 2, which, as I was explaining before, is a known user of Trick Room. It's a very unconventional Pokemon, and it does have a pretty high special attack. So Paul gets the Thunder Wave off in the Salamence, and Salamence gets the Dragon Pulse off on the Porygon, which used to be the Garchomp. So Paul makes a pretty good switch there. And now both of Kotaro's Pokemon are really slow, paralyzed, pretty low chance of moving before Paul's Pokemon. However, this means Paul can't use his Trick Room move, otherwise Kotaro will be in a pretty good spot, being slow and all. However, Thundurus, if it knows Hidden Power Ice, even if it can Thunderbolt the Lucario and get it out of there, Porygon 2 knows a lot of special moves like Flamethrower, Ice Beam, if it has one of those. Very key in taking out this Salamence, which even despite being paralyzed is very threatening to Paul's team, especially if it can get some more Dragon Pulses off. So it does go for the Thunderbolt, possibly targeting Salamence, but definitely hitting Lucario. And both Pokemon know Thunderbolt. So Lucario is going to take both of those away from the Salamence right here. And if Kotaro can move, he gets the Hyper Voice off, which will do a decent amount of damage to both Pokemon, but really not too much to either, because the Hyper Voice is resisted by Thundurus, and Porygon 2 seems to be pretty bulky at 192 HP. That's a reasonable amount for a Trick Room Pokemon. But Aurorus gets sent out here, and it's most likely to be targeted by the Thunder Wave move, so it doesn't get to move. However, if it does get a chance to move, it does threaten a lot of damage, and if the Porygon 2 doesn't have a move to get rid of the Aurorus, then it's very threatening for what Paul has left. He has shown the Garchomp in the back, and he could have the Heatran, which would help a lot against the Aurorus. Otherwise, a pretty tough situation right here. We'll see what Paul goes for besides the Thunder Wave. He does get the full para, which is kind of ridiculous, you know. He would have gotten that Ice-type Hyper Voice off and KO'd the Thundurus and did a decent amount to the Porygon 2. Oh, that's a Porygon 2. The commentator said Porygon Z, but that is a Porygon 2, which is able to hold the Eviolite item for increased bulk. So, Kotaro, rough situation here. All of his Pokemon are paralyzed. He goes for double protect, and he gets hit with the Swagger, so he's paralyzed and confused right now. It's very, very unlikely that Aurorus is able to hit through. And with the download boost, Porygon 2 is able to pick up the 1-hit KO on Kotaro's Salamence. However, Aurorus is able to hit with a low chance onto both Pokemon, but it really doesn't have too many more options left for Kotaro. He does have Porygon do pretty low, and if Garchomp's able to... Garchomp does get threatened by Hyper Voice, but not by the slow Hyper Voice. And Garchomp here can just Earthquake, be able to 1-hit KO both Pokemon, and pretty much close up the match here, even if he KOs his own Porygon 2 right here. We can see Aurorus going for the Protect right there, and he getting himself in confusion. And he'll go for the Earthquake, knock out his own Porygon 2, but confirm the KO on Aurorus. And Smeargle now doesn't have any moves left to do damage, so Kotaro just closes up the game here, concedes to Paul, who played his best against what many can consider a gimmick or a strategy, but a very, very creative team by Kotaro that he was able to bring to Day 1 Worlds, and he was able to qualify for Day 2 as well and bring that to the main stage, finishing, I believe, 40th, which isn't too great, but he was able to make it there, and that's what's important. And Kotaro doesn't concede here, but plays it out and gets the and Paul gets the knockouts here and closes up the match. And it provided a very, very, very fun set for the first game of the day on Friday at the World Championships. So a lot of people were very, very interested in seeing what Kotaro could pull out in that set. And I don't think anyone is really disappointed after seeing that finish by Kotaro. He was able to bring out a very creative strategy, and he was able to pick up a game. And it was very disappointing that he wasn't able to win that set after catching Paul off guard in game 1. But Paul showed a lot of poise and able to prevent his opponent from just running away with the match. Despite game 2 being such like a very controlled match by Kotaro, Paul was able to adapt in the game 3 and make his opponent, really think about what he could do. And Paul kind of got bailed out a bit. He got a couple wake-ups, misses, paras, stuff like that, but you have to go for the highest chance of stopping your opponent from winning the game. And Paul made excellent moves all series to make sure that Kotaro can take advantage of his Pokemon and set up on his team that threatened with a lot of super effective hyper voices and otherwise very strong moves. Alright guys, that was the first run. Hope that was alright. We're gonna see the reaction and stuff. So, thanks for watching if you made it this far. Let's see if we can clean it up next time.